Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first in a series of our DairyBeef 500 webinars. On tonight's show, we're going to discuss how to manage a dry cow in order to maximise calf health next spring, and we will look at how a dairy farmer prepares for their compact calving season. We'll provide an update on calf movement regulations, and finally, we will look forward to putting a breeding plan in place to produce high-quality replacement heifers and dairy beef calves for sale. Our excellent panel tonight will share advice and experiences, and these will ensure that dairy farmers are well prepared to have a successful calving season, healthy calves available for sale next spring, and going forward they will have a plan in place to breed high quality replacement heifers along with high genetic merit dairy beef calves. Joining me in the studio are Emma Sargent from MSD Animal Health, Stuart Childs, the Dairy Specialist from Teagasc, and Alan Twomey from Munster Bovine.
Is Alan Dillon, DairyBeef 500 Programme Manager, and I'm your host for tonight's DairyBeef 500 webinar. I'd like to remind you that this evening's webinar has been recorded and will be available in future on Teagasc YouTube channel. In order to maximise your time tonight and for you to gain the best value and information, we encourage your participation, and to ask questions please using the Q&A tab which is at the bottom of your screen. So first up tonight is Emma Sargent, who is the Ruminant Veterinary Area Manager from MSD Animal Health. Emma will give us a presentation on preparing the dairy cow in advance of the calving season to maximise calf health. And I'll hand it over to you now, Emma.
Thanks very much, Alan. So my name is Emma Sargent. I'm a vet with a background in mixed and farm animal practice for about 7 years, a good proportion of that time spent in New Zealand, and now I'm working as a technical vet with MSD Animal Health Ireland. So tonight I'm going to talk about protecting the cow in advance of the calving season to maximise calf health. And calf health really does start with the cow. So this is a huge kind of topic, and we could spend a lot of time talking about this. In the interest of time, we'll kind of narrow it down to a couple of key topics that we'll go over. They're going to be dry cow nutrition, dry cow hygiene, and then vaccination in the dry period. Now, really all these pieces of the puzzle need to come together for a healthy cow in the dry period that's going to produce a healthy calf. But yeah, we'll just cover off a few for the interest of time. So to start off with nutrition. So nutrition does influence the colostrum quality of the cow, the calf birth weight, and the immunity of both the cow and the calf. So you really need to be kind of making sure that the nutrition and the macro and micro minerals going into the diet are adequate for your cow in the dry period. If you're running into problems with body condition scores, if your body condition score is too low, going less than 3, you can end up with, cows that aren't getting those nutritional needs met. They can have poor quality colostrum, and they can also produce, a smaller, a weaker, maybe an immunosuppressed calf that doesn't kind of thrive as well and can be more prone to getting issues. On the other side of things, if you have over-conditioned cows, body condition score too high, they can be prone to metabolic issues like subclinical or clinical milk fever, and that can make calving time quite difficult for them. They can have prolonged calvings or need assistance. Sometimes what happens then is that the calf doesn't have as much vigour, is less inclined to get up and suck colostrum from the cow or be able to kind of drink it as effectively, and that can lead to problems leading into calf health as well. Colostrum quality then in itself, that is also a big kind of need for a cow in the dry period. So you want to make sure that the nutritional needs are being met, to make sure that she has all the ingredients she needs to build good quality colostrum, which is where all of the immunity is going to pass from her to the calf and create a healthy and happy calf going forward. One thing I will say, sometimes if your nutritional needs are being exceeded, if you've excess protein and energy in the diet, you can obviously get over-conditioning, but then also you can get a poor colostrum quality. You're going to have a cow producing a whole lot of milk and diluting your colostrum quality when it comes to calving time. Then just kind of moving on briefly again to hygiene. So look, hygiene promotes good udder health. Udder health in itself is a topic for colostrum quality and a healthy calf as well. But in terms of the hygiene part of things, it will promote good udder health, and that's going to lead to good quality colostrum and transition milk, that milking 2 to 6, where you're going to transfer immunity and health and protect the calf in the first weeks of life. Clean cows do bring less bugs into the calving pen. So we do have a picture of a nice shiny cow in a lovely clean bed of straw. But cows can be shedders of disease that can affect calves. Rotavirus is a big kind of example of that can cause calf scour. And what tends to happen is when a calf gets up to suckle the cow, it tends to look for a hock or a tail or anything other than a teat at first. And if they're contaminated with fecal matter or dung, that can be an immediate source of infection to a calf. The last thing then is that a clean udder is also less likely to contaminate your colostrum when you're collecting it, that first milk and beestings. Bacteria that get into that colostrum, even if it's good quality colostrum, can affect the ability of that calf to absorb it and get its immunity properly. So good hygiene and a clean cow coming into calving time is going to just help you with that in that regard. Again, every farm is different when it comes to nutritional needs, all that kind of thing. So you're best off to consult with your vet or your farm advisor if you've had challenges in the past or if you're just not sure where you're at. And things like silage testing, blood testing, and even cow collar data. For example, the Sensub collars, they can give you rumination information when it comes to the transition period. That can give you an indication of whether things are going well or not. So then just moving on to vaccination in the dry period. And as I said, vaccination is just one part of the puzzle. You need all the other things to be working well for the cow to respond well and generate good immunity to vaccinations. But dry period then generally is an optimal time for certain vaccines to be given. So our calf scour vaccines, they transfer all the protection that we give to that calf through colostrum and transition milk. And so we want to be giving those vaccines to the cow right at the point where she's generating that colostrum ready to go for the calf. The other thing is that calving time is a period of high stress for the cow. And high stress often means cows are more prone to shedding disease. So rotavirus and IBR are just two examples of that. So we want to have them vaccinated in advance of the risk period or the stressful period so that we are reducing the risk of them shedding disease and passing that on to calves with the risk of them becoming sick then. One point I will kind of focus on here, which is simple but can be overlooked, is that the correct storage, mixing and administration of your vaccines are key. So you're usually spending a lot of time, effort, money, labour into your vaccination protocols. And simple things like just making sure the fridge is at the right temperature, it's not freezing the vaccines at the back of the fridge, you are mixing vaccines correctly, you know which ones can and cannot be administered together, and you're giving them in the right place to the cow. So the right dose going in the right place to the cow can all make a difference to how well the cow responds to that vaccine, how much immunity she generates to then pass on to the calf and her colostrum. So we'll just focus on a couple of vaccines that are usually given in the dry period or are ideal to be given in the dry period. As I said, there are so many options and your vet is the best point of contact, but we'll just go through a few common ones here now. So Bovillus IBR Marker Live is a vaccine that we can give in the dry period. It protects against infectious bovine rhinotracheitis or IBR. This is a herpes virus that infects animals of all ages, and once an animal is infected, it remains infected for life and will shed that disease during times of stress, such as calving. So if you're vaccinating against it, this is the vaccine of choice from an MSD point of view. We would look at giving a 2 ml dose. It's just a one dose that goes into the muscle for the cow. Or it can go up the nose as well. And one point to note is that if you are vaccinating calves with this vaccine, if they're under 3 months old, it has to go up the nose. So your onset of immunity is 4 days if it's given up the nose and 14 days if it goes into the muscle. And your duration of immunity is 6 to 12 months. That really depends on the prevalence of IBR in your herd and individual factors on farm. So what we're aiming to do with this vaccine is just reduce the clinical signs. Clinical signs of IBR can be discharge from the nose and eyes, a very high temperature, a milk drop, cows off colour. So we're trying to reduce the signs from happening themselves and reduce the shedding of infected animals. So just reduce that shedding at stressful times so that they're not passing disease on to other cows or to calves that can be in the same airspace as them. And we also want to reduce the number of new infections. So any cow that is shedding IBR, she can infect up to 7 other animals at the time she is shedding, but vaccination can hugely decrease that. So it's a great way of trying to control IBR on the farm, protect our cows and our calves. Then we'll move to Bovillus cryptium. So this is our new vaccine to protect calves against cryptosporidiosis scour. It's been 23 years in the making and we're delighted to finally have it available. So as I said, it protects against crypto scour. It is a mineral oil vaccine that is to be given as a 2 ml dose under the skin. In the first year that you're giving it, or to any animal that hasn't had it before, you need a 2-dose primary course. Those 2 doses are to be given 4 to 5 weeks apart in the 12 to 3 week period pre-calving. For any subsequent calvings that cow is going to have once she's had that primary course, you just need to give 1 booster dose in the 12 to 3 week period pre-calving. So it has a 28-day shelf life once it's first opened, which can be useful. You can use the same bottle to do your primary dose and your booster dose in that 4 to 5 week period apart from each other, as long as it's kept in the fridge in between and it's not being contaminated with any dirty needles. And it is available in a 5, 20 and a 50 dose pack size. You can give it at the same time as Rotavet Corona, and we'll go through a protocol with that a little bit later. And we do recommend, as we discussed before, the colostrum is the source of immunity for the calf, but alongside that first feed of beastons you're going to give to protect the calf, you also give at least 5 days of transition milk, that milking 2 to 6, to continue local immunity and local protection in the gut of the calf. We'll just chat a bit about Bovilis rotavet corona. So this is our tried and trusted vaccine to protect against rotavirus, coronavirus and E. coli scours. Rotavirus is the #1 cause of deaths in calves from calf scour under 1 month old, with crypto in a close second. So it's well worth being able to protect these calves against this scour. Again, it's a mineral oil vaccine and a 2 ml dose. It can be given under the skin or into the muscle. And this vaccine is a single dose for your primary course and your booster. So that single dose being given in the 12 to 3 week period pre-calving. Same as the Bovilis cryptium, it has a 28-day shelf life after first opening it, as long as it's in the fridge and not contaminated. And again, comes in a 5, 20 and 50 dose pack size. So how do we use these calf scour vaccines? So they are given in the 12 to 3 week period pre-calving. As I said, the Bovilis rotavet corona is a 1 dose course, whereas the first year you're using Bovilis cryptium, it is a 2 dose course, 4 to 5 weeks apart. So you can give them at the same time, and what we would recommend is, if you are used to giving rotavet corona, go in with your rotavet corona dose at the same time as you normally do, and give your second dose of cryptium at that same time. Then work back a month from then and go in with your first dose of Bovilis cryptium. So that is me. That's just kind of a brief overview of some of the common vaccines we can give in the dry period, and a couple of factors that will assist you in getting the most out of these vaccines, maximising your cow's immunity so she can pass that on to the calf in her colostrum, and you're going on to get a nice, healthy, happy calf that's ready to go. Thanks very much. That's me, and I'll go back to you, Alan.
Emma, thank you for a very informative presentation. You provide a lot of good advice, I see there, for dairy farmers in relation to maximising the health of the cow. Now, in order to have, a very strong, healthy calf next spring, whether that calf is for a heifer to be used as a replacement or for a dairy beef calf for sale. So we'll just touch on one question there before we go to Stuart's presentation. I suppose we've the new crypto vaccine. This is 23 years, he said, in the making here now, so it's something we've been waiting for a long time. I suppose the question may be, farmers generally see crypto hit midway or in the latter half of the calving season. Could you just vaccinate the later calving cows with this vaccine, or would you recommend doing the whole herd?
Yeah, I know it is tempting to want to be able to do that, but in an ideal scenario, no, it's not something that we would recommend. To get optimal results from the vaccine, you want to be able to kind of get a whole herd vaccination policy going. Reason for that basically is vaccinated animals receiving colostrum from vaccinated cows, they tend to shed less crypto into the environment, and your infectious pressure is lower. That calf is kind of always balancing infectious pressure against its own immune system, and just being able to decrease the amount of bugs in the environment is going to help those later calves overcome disease when they usually do. Just in terms of practicality as well, it can be hard to remember which cows receive 2 doses in 1 year if you're only doing a few of them, and then next year it gets a bit messy remembering what is given what. So often it's easier to adopt a whole herd vaccination policy from the get-go.
Okay, thanks Emma. Okay, so just to remind our audience again to keep the questions coming and to submit them through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. So next up is our Teagasc Dairy Specialist, Stuart Childs. And Stuart will discuss how dairy farmers can prepare their farm for a compact calving season and the subsequent successful sale of healthy calves next spring. And Stuart's also going to give us details on any regulations around the movement and sale of young calves. So over to you there now, Stuart.
Thanks, Alan. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to speak to you this evening about what dairy farmers can do to prepare their farm for compact calving and the successful sale of healthy calves. I suppose everybody will be familiar with the saying, fail to prepare, prepare to fail, and it's very true when it comes to calving, where what we're trying to do is trying to reduce infection pressure so that calves will not get sick in the first place, and all that can be done in advance to a large degree. So power washing is an important piece of the jigsaw. A lot of farms have been very busy throughout the summer, busier than they would normally be given the way the year has been, and may not have gotten around to doing the usual jobs that will be completed during the summer, such as power washing of calf sheds and so forth. So people should complete that as soon as possible. If you've had issues with Cryptosporidium in the past, steam washing should be considered because it's very good to clear out that very difficult parasite. Hot washing is a successful, useful tool in that regard. Appropriate disinfection. It's important that people use disinfectants that are effective against Cryptosporidium. In particular, that's the one that seems to vary depending on the disinfectant that you buy. If you've had Cryptosporidium in the past, make sure the disinfectant that you buy is effective against Crypto. Power washing and disinfecting of all the feeding equipment is important as well, possibly done at the end of the season last year, but needs to be done again in advance of the coming season. Getting ready to feed calves with clean, sanitised equipment is an important piece of the jigsaw in terms of reducing that infection pressure. Then people, I think, should also consider putting a plan in place for washing those feeding utensils during the season. So colostrum in particular and milk are difficult products to clean. People will be aware of that from the process required to clean their milking machines and their bulk tanks. And it's true also for the feeding utensils that people are using. So a recommendation would be people would use a cold rinse so as not to kind of stick the proteins onto the buckets and the feeders and so forth. Then use a warm detergent wash, rinse again, disinfect or sanitize and leave to dry. That's a good procedure for people to put in place, but people need to think about a way of doing that. So you can do that now rather than trying to do it in the heat of battle in late January, early February. Jobs that can be completed now in advance, repairing of gates, any gates that were damaged last year, fixing of lights that maybe have blown. You're going to be working in the late evenings in the springtime and early mornings when it's dark. You're going to need lights from both a health and safety point of view and from also an observation point of view to see animals that might be a little bit off form. If you've bad lighting, they may not stand out as easily. In terms of clean water supply, it's important that people have fresh clean water available to calves at all time. That is key for rumen development. Some places may not have a piped water supply set up. You should be doing something about that now if you don't, and you're going to be using pens in that area for calves this coming spring. That's because it's not going to be feasible to be drawing water and keeping it clean when you're busy with calving. In terms of people that have calf feeders, servicing of those is important to have done in advance so that they're ready to go. The other thing that's important with cleaning or with automatic feeders is that the header tanks that feed them to maintain the water pressure for them can often build up algae and bacteria because of being unused for long periods from one season to the other. So check that they're okay, maybe flush them out and get fresh clean water available in those header tanks for the coming season. A calving kit would be a good idea for people as well. So the tags should be ordered now in order to make sure that they're on farm by the time the first calves hit the ground. Iodine for navels, calving jack and ropes if required at the point of use. So everything should be nearby, near to hand where it's going to be needed so that you're not traipsing up and down around the yards and sheds in order to get what you need. Emma has talked about vaccinations and colostrum management, so we'll brush over that, but they are very, very important, and the vaccinations have to be completed in advance, and preparing for managing colostrum is something that can be done in advance as well. Space then is the last piece, I suppose, and that's quite a critical element of it. Everyone needs their space, and stock are no different. Where I'm standing here in the studio, if Emma and the two Allens were to come over and stand over very close to me, I wouldn't feel all that comfortable because they're invading my space. Calves are quite similar. They like their own bit of space. The more calves we push into an area or press into an area, the more stressed they're going to become, and they're not going to be as healthy as we want them to be as a result. Space comes in two forms, I suppose. We're talking about floor space and also air space. So the floor space is measured by length by breadth. And then the airspace is length by breadth by the average height of the shed. In terms of floor space, calves need a minimum of 1.5 metres squared when they're less than 3 weeks of age, and they need 1.7 metres cubed when they're less than 70 kilos. So up to the point of weaning, effectively, they're going up to close to 2 to 2.5 metres. So if you draw that out on the ground, you'll see that it's quite an amount of space. And you can see in the background there that there's quite a spacious pen there with approximately 11 calves in it. And they have loads of room to themselves, effectively, and they're nestled down quite nicely into the straw. The airspace is important in terms of clearing out kind of pathogens that might be floating around. We don't have that stack effect that we associate with older cattle, so you do need some bit of air movement in the shed. People may need to look at that in terms of good ventilation, but we don't want drafts either. I suppose the big thing to take cognizance of is compact calving and the space requirement. So I have two examples that I'm going to show you here. The first is a person that's calving close to the national average at 65% of their herd calving in 6 weeks. They have in or around 20 to 25 replacements, which are shown by the blue line. The red line is demonstrating the beef calves, and the green line, which is the one that people need to take note of most, is the total number of calves. In this scenario, the bull calves and the beef calves are moving after 2 weeks, which is, I suppose, was probably something that people were doing in the past, but we're beginning to move away from it a little bit more, or less and less calves are moving off the farm at that early stage. And what that does then in terms of the actual number of calves on the farm at any one time in that scenario is it means in our 100 cow scenario at 65% calving rate, 39 calves is kind of the maximum calves that we're going to have at any stage. And that will fall around in or around the 5th of March. And the area that's required for them is 66 square metres for floor space and 273 cubic metres for airspace. If we move towards what the target would be, which is 90%, 6-week calving rate, with all the other parameters staying the same, so bull calves moving at 2 weeks, beef calves moving at 2 weeks, and 20 to 25% replacement rate, which obviously stay on the farm for rearing, you can see that we have an increase in the number of calves up to 52 from 39, and we also have a shift backwards in terms of that peak date. So we're hitting peak around the 25th or 26th of February. We can also see that in the top line you have another 22 square metres of floor space required and 60, 70, 80 extra cubic metres of airspace required. So this is important, that if we have improved our 6-week calving rate in the last number of years, that we may actually find that we're a little bit short of space. So we need to calculate what space we have available and examine have we sufficient amount to deal with the calves that are going to be coming at us. I suppose the next thing that we look at is that age of sale, and I've mentioned it there previously that as we applying the same criteria as previously, 65% 6-week calving rate or 20 to 25% replacement rate staying on the farm, but changing the time that we sell these calves, so all dairy males that are generated and beef calves are staying on the farm until they're 4 weeks of age. We can see what has actually happened is that our 65% 6-week calving rate now mimics the 90% calving rate with the calves moving at 2 weeks of age on the previous slide. So now our 88 square metres is suitable for our 65% 6-week calving rate and our 4 weeks of age selling stage. And you can see that the peak date is back around February as it was with the 90%. So then if we just roll that on again and we apply our 90% 6-week calving rate and keeping our dairy males and our dairy beef calves on the farm until they're 4 weeks of age, you can see that there's a significant uplift in the amount of space that's required. So we've gone from 88 on the previous slide to 123 square metres required and 506 cubic metres of space required. Peak is happening around March 5th because we just have more calves on the farm, but we're moved up significantly in terms of the number of calves. There's an extra 20 calves on this farm at this period of time. So that means that there's more space required, and people just need to be aware of that. So how much space will you need? As I said, length by breadth by height, our average height for the cubic air capacity, and length by breadth for the floor space. Do that sum there. This sheet is available from any of the advisory offices across the country if people want to get it, but it's a straightforward enough calculation. Whichever one is lower, it dictates the number of calves that you put into the shed. So if your floor space is lower than your air space, it's the floor space that dictates. If it happens to be the other way around, which would be unlikely but could happen, the airspace will dictate the number of calves that can be kept in the shed. If you're short of space, are there options within the yard? So people may have machinery stored in sheds. Those sheds the machinery could be removed from them and they could be used as calf housing. If you don't have any options like that, look at alternative forms of accommodation, such as calf hutches or calf igloos. And you can see on the right-hand side here, we have a good example where the igloos are actually outside of a shed there, which would significantly increase the space rather than actually having them inside in the shed. So the most important thing is that people do not compromise on space. And I suppose for those two examples of the hutches or the igloos or any using a machinery shed or anything, it's important to point out that people need to be compliant with nitrates as well in terms of any runoff that's coming off of that bedding or where the calves are standing, okay? So sale of calves, when can I actually sell them? There's often a lot of confusion, even though this hasn't changed for a good number of years, there's always confusion around this every year. So when can calves actually start to move off the farm? Farm-to-farm sales can occur once the calves are 10 days old, so that is on the 11th day. Farm-to-mart sales can actually occur at 10 days of age as well, so again on the 11th day. But it's important that people note that they must be actually 14 days old, so on the 15th day, in order to be eligible for export. And the same is true for export directly off the farm. They must be on the 15th day before they leave the farm if they're going for export. Otherwise, they are not going to be allowed to be exported and they're going to end up coming back to you, which is a situation that people don't want in terms of calves coming back having mixed with other calves in particular. So just to summarise, Alan, prevention is always better than cure. Another well-known statement. Having enough floor space and air space for peak calves, so knowing what your peak calf number is going to be and having sufficient floor and air space for them is vital. Calves are staying on farm for longer, so more space might be needed now than was in the past. So again, as I said, people need to know what they need. Do not compromise on space. It's a critical piece in the jigsaw of calf health. Reducing infection pressure is critical as well. Cleaning and disinfection ahead of the season, the hygiene of sheds and equipment throughout the season. And then Emma's talked about the immunity piece, so colostrum 1, 2, 3, harvesting it cleanly and so forth, and getting it into the calves in time is all very, very important to driving healthy calves. And I suppose when you combine those two together, so reduced infection pressure and good immunity together will equal healthy calves. So I'll leave it at that and I'll hand back to you, Alan.
Okay, many thanks, Stuart. That's a very interesting and a practical presentation. And it's obviously a very busy time of year in the spring on dairy farms, and it's important that I suppose farmers are well prepared in advance. So just before we head into the Q&A, and again you can send it into questions there as we'll answer them later. I suppose you mentioned on the live export thing, and when calves can be sold. So we often hear rumours, live exports could be under threat. And if something was to happen, live exports, whether it does or not, we'd have 200,000 extra calves in the country that would need to find a home in a short space of time. How would we handle that?
Well, I suppose firstly, Alan, my colleagues in Moorpark, Emer Kennedy in particular, and her team are working very hard around the calf export piece to make sure that is maintained, hopefully. Obviously, it's subject to discussion at European level, so we may not be able to control it. So I suppose to answer your question, if we do end up with a situation where that route to market is eliminated, it does mean that there's going to be a lot more calves on farm. I suppose it might be slightly controversial to say it, but suckler numbers are declining. People may be interested in going into dry stock rather than the suckler calf, obviously. So there may be more homes come from that area, possibly for calves. But I suppose the big question for dairy farmers is, are people actually going to take those calves and rear them from the 3-4 week of age, or are they actually going to have to rear them right through to the point of sale? So I suppose that's where the challenge lies, and I suppose we have to wait and see what way it's going to go in terms of what is the actual legislation going to be. I suppose the one positive that I could say to people that are tuned in tonight is that talking to buyers in Europe, they really do like Irish calves because we have done such a good job down through the years in terms of the healthy calves. And I suppose feeding on from what Emma has talked about in terms of the crypto vaccine and so forth, that could just take it to another level altogether. So they do want those calves, but legislation may stop them from travelling eventually or potentially. But there is scope for people to keep these calves temporarily, and that people will buy them, but it does put pressures on dairy farms potentially.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. I'm sure we'll be back to you later again on this topic. So next up is our final speaker for the evening, and that's Alan Twomey, a dairy and beef geneticist from Munster Bovine. And Alan will discuss how dairy farmers can put a breeding plan in place to obtain high quality replacement heifers, while also at the same time producing excellent genetic potential dairy beef calves for sale.
So over to you now, Alan.
Thanks, Alan. Good evening. I'm going to talk to you tonight about a plan for the spring ahead on how to use your dairy semen and your beef semen. But firstly, I'm just going to go through why our breeding season has changed in our dairy herds in recent years. I suppose the first main thing is fertility has really improved in dairy herds, and this has really been seen from the introduction of the EBI in 2000. The fertility genetically of cows has improved year on, year in. And on top of that, management has also improved, so our cows are lasting longer, surviving longer in the herd, so there's a lower need for a replacement rate. The second key thing that has changed is the herd is beginning to stabilise. So over the last 10 years, we saw a large increase in dairy cow numbers since quota abolishment in 2015. But over the last couple of years, that's beginning to level off, and actually going forward, we've actually seen a slight decline in herd size, but it's pretty much stabilising. And finally, we see the introduction of sex semen, which is really actually still a relatively new tool for many farmers, but we see it growing rapidly. So back in 22, we saw that it accounted for just under 15% of all dairy AI, and from the past season we've just seen that has grown up to 30% of dairy AI being used in dairy herds is sex semen. So those three things has led to three main changes in our breeding season. There's now less need of replacements because there's less of a demand for those. We can be more selective of the cows for the dairy semen. So we're using less, so now we need to pick the cows we're using our dairy semen in. And finally there's an increased use of beef in the dairy herd. So where previously the breeding season was dairy for so many weeks and then beef, we can now see that we should be actually only using dairy on select cows and then beef on the cows that we don't want replacements from. So the first thing that you can all do with planning your breeding season ahead is calculate the number of replacements that you need for your herd. So we look back at how many replacements you need last year and thinking about where you want to go as your herd expands, or as it stabilises, or is it going to reduce. So then calculate how many heifers do you need to calve down in your herd each year. For an example, if you wanted 20 heifers, then you calculate how many dairy straws do you need to generate that number of heifers calving down. So with the example of 20, you would actually need 48 sex straws, so that's 48 inseminations with sex, and 73 conventional dairy straws to get that number of 20 heifers. That's assuming a 50% conception with sex and a 60% conception with conventional dairy semen. As we can see, that's the average in the field. So once you have the number of dairy inseminations calculated, you can work out which females that you're going to use that dairy semen on. And firstly is those maiden heifers. There's different people have different issues with using maiden heifers, but I suppose the advice is try to use dairy, and particularly dairy sex if possible, on these maiden heifers. They're your elite group genetically, so these are your best heifers to be, or best females to be using, to be generating your females from, and also they're your most fertile group, so then they're more suitable for sex. But obviously we can see there's many challenges. They can maybe on out farms, they're more of a difficult group to bring in for AI, but one solution here is looking at synchronization as an option, so fixed time AI and using one round of dairy AI. Once you've decided whether you're using dairy or not in your maidens, you can then calculate how much dairy you need to use on your main cow herd. So we split that cow herd into dairy AI and beef AI. So for your dairy AI, what you're looking for is you're identifying cows that have a high genetic merit. And when I say a high genetic merit, I mean cows with a good EBI, but are balanced for good milk production and fertility. And you also can look at traits such as health, so looking at those higher health genetic merit cows. But it's also important to look at your milk recording results. So this is really a key part of why herds should do more milk recording is you can see what cows are actually performing well in your herd. And then finally is you should be looking at fertile cows, particularly if you're using sex semen. You need to use this on fertile cows, so cows that hold good body condition score, cows that are calving early in the breeding season, and your younger cows are generally more fertile. I suppose here I've just shown an example of, you say, a FarmOps app, where this can be used as a tool, is where it can help you identify females to use your dairy AI. Vice versa, we need to identify which cows you can use your beef on. And I just explained how you pick your cows for dairy, but you could also work from the bottom up. So what cows do you not want dairy on? These are your cows that are your problem cows. So we'll take cows that have lameness, mastitis, and somatic cell count. These are cows that you don't want to breed a heifer off, because you don't want their daughters to bring these problems with them. So you should identify these for beef. And then finally is kind of the opposite to what we said with the dairy. So the cows that are not performing well in your herd, the cows of poor genetic merit, these are the cows you should be using your beef on. So I suppose, and just for an example, we'll say that you want that 20 heifers, 20 replacement heifers. You've decided to use one round of sexed AI in your maidens, so you're using 20 straws of sex semen. Then you have 28 remaining females to AI, to sex semen. So you should be identifying around 35 cows then for that dairy, to ensure that you have 28 cows coming in your first 3 weeks of that AI season, and your remaining cows should get beef. The other advantage of using your beef or your dairy on maiden heifers is, when you're using your beef on your cows, you're getting a better calf. So your cows are going to generate a heavier calf, and that heavier calf we can see is going to generate a higher value and a higher premium in the market. So then I suppose I don't have enough time to discuss on picking your dairy straws, but for tonight I'm going to pick generally what you need to do is to maximising your beef calves coming from your farm. So I suppose we talk a lot about CBV and beef merit, but I suppose the most important thing when you're selecting your beef bull is calving ease. That's your still #1 part of any dairy herd. And for getting your calving ease, using proven bulls is important here. And when I say proven bulls, that's cows with bulls that have a high number of calving records. So you have AI bulls that have over 1,000 records. Then you go across loads of different herds. So then you can be sure if they have 1,000 records, they're genetically shown to be easy calving. You can be confident then when using these bulls in your cows, and you can be to ensure that you don't have any calving issues. Because bulls with no calving issues are less labour, going to have improve your fertility of your herd, and also improve the milk production of your herd. Second key thing that many dairy farmers look for is gestation length. And I suppose, as I said, our breeding season has really changed in recent years. So gestation length has come actually less important, because before we were just using beef at the end of the season, but now since we're using beef at the start of the season, gestation length is less important. So I would say earlier in the breeding season, you don't need to focus as much on gestation length. Until it gets later in the breeding season, you want to tighten up your calving season. That's where you should be putting a more focus on your gestation length. So once you've the two of those solved and you've picked your bulls that have identified those, you need to maximise your beef potential. So this is where you're going to get a higher calf with CBV and a higher calf quality. So firstly, you want to break that up into different your cow cohorts. So as we spoke about is your maiden heifers. Well, the preference here is to use dairy where possible, but if you are going to use beef, you need to be really cautious here in calving difficulty. So you're going to be using extremely high reliable, so greater than 90%, and looking at bulls that are less than 7.5% on that heifer calving difficulty. Just for an example here, Mateo is a great example for that. The next cohort then is your second calver. So these are your youngest cows in the herd. I suppose they're generally cows that are that smaller. There's quite a difficulty of calving difficulty in these. So you need to put a bit of focus on calving difficulty. So you're looking here at cow calving difficulty figures of less than 3%. But again, within that threshold, you're trying to maximise that beef subindex to ensure you still get a good high quality calf. Examples here is Tower Tommy as an Angus, and also Knotsdown Rye if you were looking for something different. He's a sailor bull that is extremely easy calving. Our next group up then will say your lactation 2 and your lactation 3 cows is your main cohort of cows within your herd. Your calving ability of these cows is less restrictive, so again we can just up that calving threshold that little bit, so you can go up to 3.5 or maybe up to 4%. But again, once you up that calving ability, you can try to maximise that beef subindex again. 2 examples here of an Angus is Horatio and a Hereford is Nijinsky. And then finally, I suppose, those older cows in the herd, those bigger cows, you can try to even push those boundaries even a bit more. You can go up to 4.5 or maybe 5% and try to use some more continental breeds such as Belgian Blue, Limousin or Charlie. So you'll hear we have an example of Nell is a Limousin and La Panne, which is one of the most easiest calving Charlies available and proven. There's also here an option to use test sires in this cohort. So I suppose to summarise and just to take 3 key points home is just to breed the required number of replacements. So you should only be using enough dairy AI to breed the number of replacements that you require. Secondly, is select your cows for dairy. So here you should be selecting the cows which bulls that you're putting your sex dairy or conventional dairy in to ensure you maximise the genetic potential of your dairy heifer group. And finally, to maximise your beef calf crop, you want to be looking at proven easy calving with a high beef value and try to increase that calving difficulty and the beef value as you go into those older cows. They can have that higher ability to get those more beefier bulls and therefore get a higher value for your calves. So I suppose to summarise is to breed the required number of placements, select your dairy for your best cows, and finally maximise your beef merit with proven easy calving. That's all for me. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, Alan. Many thanks for a very insightful and interesting presentation, and you've provided a lot of good advice on maximising where quality calves coming from the dairy herd, whether they're going to be replacements or they're going to be reared on as calves for dairy beef systems. So I suppose just one question there, I suppose if we're to look at what are 2 or 3 things to look for to achieve short gestation length and easy calving bulls targets, while you also want to improve the beef traits of your calf. You don't want to be producing that poor quality beef calf. What would you be looking for there?
I suppose, like I said, your calving ease is still the most important thing for that dairy farm. We actually see now there's very little calving issues in many dairy farms, and we certainly don't want to change that. So calving ease is number 1, but within that is try to maximise the beef potential. And when I'm saying maximise the beef potential, we're looking at the beef subindex within the DBI. So the higher the beef subindex, the higher calf quality you're going to have, and the higher CBV those calves will have. And then on gestation length, I suppose our breeding season is changing. We're using now beef earlier in that breeding season, so now gestation length is not as much of an importance in some of the beef bulls, particularly at the start of the season. Only now when we're getting later in that season, to make sure we have a tightened calving season, you'll be looking at that gestation length. So in the last 3 weeks, you're going to be tightening it up, and I suppose you're looking at negative gestation value bulls when you're selecting beef bulls for later in the calving season.
Okay, thanks very much, Alan. We're going to move on now, I suppose, to our question and answers. So you can keep sending in the question and answers there on the tab down at the bottom of the screen. I'd like to thank all our 3 panelists for their presentations. So first one there is coming up to you, Emma. I suppose if colostrum quality has been suffering in previous years, can supplementary protein such as a soya-based product in the 2 to 3 weeks pre-calving help the cow?
Yeah, I suppose every little helps in the dry period when you're looking at colostrum quality. It probably does come down to an individual farm basis. So I probably would be looking at kind of nutritional analysis in the dry period overall, getting your silage tested, looking at different various kind of minerals you can be adding in. It's really very individual, and I suppose that's
Okay.
the long and short of it, whether kind of you would advise on
the testing of the silage is important element. It's been a difficult year again in terms of making silage. Between the quality of the silage is definitely going to be questionable from the point of view of long periods of low growth, poor uptake of nitrogen, probably low protein as a result of it, and maybe low DMD is kind of stemmy, stocky kind of material. So people, I think, will have to at least know what they're going to feed, and then, as Emma has said, make a plan around whether they're going to actually supplement that. And definitely, if there's an issue in terms of the protein content on the silage test, something has to be done there, or you're setting yourself up for failure in terms of the quality of the colostrum. But the 2 to 3 weeks, as the question has mentioned, is sufficient.
Okay. And just sticking with feeding there, Stuart, then, I suppose, how many weeks pre-calving should dry cow minerals be fed?
Yeah, look, I suppose there's variation in terms of the theories behind it, Alan. Like the number that seems to stand out from what I hear around the industry would be 6 kgs of minerals have to go into the animal. The theory would be that you're probably starting around now for a lot of the spring calving herds, so that they're going to get it over the next 6 or 7 weeks. But there is also kind of a theory there that maybe you can, if you're late introducing it, you can kind of just feed it at a little higher rate maybe in order to make up that 6 kilos. But look, people should really take from tonight that they need to be starting their dry cow mineral now, and definitely with dairy heifers, they need to get it sooner rather than later, because they've had no mineral availability to them outside of the grass minerals that they would be consuming, we'll say as in the grass, the minerals that they're getting from the grass, and they will be deficient in minerals if they don't get access to the minerals immediately, effectively.
Okay. Alan, moving on to you then, I suppose this is a question on sex semen. Now, has Munster Bovine considered using sex male beef semen? Would this be a positive for the beef farmers in terms of carcass, or are we as well off to stick with the split heifer and bull system?
I suppose we have it available. There's sex male available in your Angus and Hereford. But I suppose at the moment, for advice for dairy farmers, they're not really seeing that major difference between your male calf and your heifer calf and the mart. So there's very little advantage. Like sex semen is a costly product. There's a risk, like obviously there's going to be a slightly less conception rate from your sex semen. So it's a kind of something you have to consider to weigh up, are you actually going to get the payback for it? So at the moment we don't really see adoption in dairy farms using sex male. It's more for your beef breeders are using your sex male at the moment.
Okay. Back to you, Emma, then, I suppose, for IBR vaccine. Does the IBR vaccine given to the cow pass much immunity onto the calf?
So long story short is we don't know. We know that there are antibodies passed to calves from cows that are vaccinated, and the main kind of time we see that is if you're trying to get animals into AI centre and they're testing positive on bloods for IBR. However, we don't know, or we aren't confident enough to say that those antibodies are enough to protect that calf directly. Certainly if the calf is in the same airspace as the cow, having the cow vaccinated, shedding less disease is going to be beneficial to the calf. What I would say, if you are having IBR issues in your calves, you can go in with IBR vaccine from 2 weeks of age in those calves, and that would be something I would be recommending if you are having issues in those younger calves. That has to go up the nose if you're doing it, intranasal administration. Otherwise, going in with a policy from 3 months of age is where I would start. So I wouldn't be relying on antibodies or protection coming from colostrum from vaccinated cows. If you're having issues, I would still be looking for vaccination, but it will just reduce the amount that the cow is shedding on the farm.
And we'll just maybe stick with you there, because when you mentioned colostrum, there's one here on colostrum. How many feeds of colostrum? The question is, should a calf get for maximum immunity? Is it the number of feeds, or is it the volume given initially? Which would it be?
Yeah, so we kind of follow a general policy of a 3-2-1 rule. So you want to be making sure that calf is getting at least 3 litres of colostrum, or 10% of its body weight in that first feed. First feed should be given ideally within 2 hours, and it needs to be that first beastons that is milked from the cow. That's kind of your liquid gold where that immunity is transferred. So that's kind of your initial colostrum. And actually, just a point to make on that colostrum quality maybe as well. If that's an issue, you could be looking at the time after calving that you're milking the cow. That can affect her colostrum quality as well, trying to get her milked early and get that into the calf. Then going forward from your first milking colostrum, your transition milk, which is your milkings 2 to 6 or maybe 8, depending on the production of the cow. That is necessary for a further 5 days to provide local immunity in the gut. So that can be kind of, your pool transition milk, that 2 to 6 milkings. That needs to be fed for at least 5 days. The longer you are feeding that transition milk, the longer your protection will last.
Okay. Stuart, you mentioned a lot about housing and that, and there was a question in, maybe some people are cleaning out sheds now, maybe getting ready for calving again. How long do these sheds need to be cleaned and disinfected and left to dry out before you put calves in? What's the ideal at the time?
Sure, I suppose the earlier the better, really, Alan. And I suppose individual pens and penning that maybe can be removed from the shed in an ideal scenario would actually be putting it out into the open during the summer. But if people are only going about it now, the objective is to get all the organic material out of there, so get what was in there out of there as quickly as possible, get the place washed and let it dry out. So that's because you need to leave it dry before you can apply the disinfectant. So that means opening up shed doors and so forth. So you want to get all that done before there's any calves going to be floating around. So the sooner that people can get at that, the better. Even if it was just the washing and that the disinfection took place prior, just maybe shortly prior to actual calving, but just getting it done sooner rather than later. The longer you can leave between the last batch of calves being in the shed and the new group coming into it, the greater the chance of eliminating kind of carryover of infection.
Okay. I suppose, Alan, on to you then. When selecting beef bulls on mature dairy cows, what's the maximum calving difficulty do you think you could go to? Where would you stop?
So I would really say that's up to farmer preference. Look, there's some people take risks, they get away with it. I wouldn't be going out advising it. What I'd be recommending is, if you were kind of using these more difficult calving bulls, is maybe test the waters. So maybe this year go to 5, maybe if you wanted to go up 5.5%, see how you get on. Next year go a bit higher and kind of just see where your kind of limits are on calving difficulty. And that'd be my advice going forward. But there is certainly, in those more mature cows, there is an advantage of you can try to get those premium values, especially using Belgian Blues and Charlies. We can see there's premium, they're making premium price in calf sales at the moment.
And I suppose just keep to say with you there, for cows with a very low beef merit, what beef sub-index should I be looking for to breed a high CBV calf? I suppose you're generally talking kind of crossbred type cows or something like that there.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it's you're trying to find the calving threshold that you're happy with. So if that cow is able to take that more higher calving threshold, yes, you try to maximise that beef sub-index. So again, don't like using breeds. There's high beef merit Angus and heifers, but obviously if you can take that extra calving, try to use some more continental breeds to try to improve that calf value. But I suppose it's advice, irrespective of your cow, the higher the beef sub-index you use, the higher the value your calf is going to be.
Okay.
And Alan, is it a fair comment that like a lot of the dairy bulls that people are using are going to be up around 3 and 4% anyway? So when you talk about 5%, you're only talking about going up 1 or 2 points there. You're not actually, it's not a huge leap of faith.
Absolutely, it's not a huge leap of faith, and I suppose it's really is just building that confidence, is trying to push the waters and just seeing what you're comfortable with. Exactly.
Okay. Emma, the cost of that crypto vaccine, this is a new vaccine. How much is it costing per head? I suppose it's a 2-shot for the first year, and a single shot, is it after that?
That's exactly it.
What are the costs per year then?
So I suppose cost will vary depending on where you're sourcing the vaccine from, and your local vet is the best person to determine cost. I suppose ballpark it's going to be a similar figure to Rotavirus vaccination. Significant investment in the first year, but like the cost benefit you're going to get is just huge if you've had crypto issues in the past. So we have done analysis that kind of direct losses are about €70 for dairy calves and €161 for beef calves that have had issues with cryptosporidiosis scour just from not meeting their targets from treatments, and that's not including any labour involved in the calf scour outbreak. So while it is an investment with 2 doses in the first year, the benefits of it, if used correctly, are huge and well worth the investment.
Okay, so what cost are we talking? 10, 12 euros a shot or something?
Around the ballpark of €10, I suppose. Yeah, maybe a little bit more, but best to consult with your local vet for an accurate price.
And Alan, can I just, Emma, timing of that first initial dose now, is that we're getting to a critical point if people are going to decide to do this?
Exactly.
And I had, like you said there, Alan, earlier, I had heard a lot of people talking about maybe doing the second half of the herd, but I hadn't actually thought of the point that you made, in that we're going to get completely confused next year as to who gets it or who shouldn't. So yes, there's a big cost associated with this year, but it's a
worthwhile cost.
Yeah, but the theory of actually the practice of going about this now it's actually nearly now people need to go doing it if they're going to be calving cows
Exactly.
in early February. Like.
Yeah, so in essence, you're going to need at least 7 weeks, ideally kind of 8 weeks leeway to start your crypto vaccination now. So I suppose we're at the start of December now. If you're starting to calve at the start of February, you're going to need to go in with the vaccine now. On our social media and our Instagram, we do have kind of helpful calendar dates going up weekly, so you can have a look on there to just get, if you're a better idea exactly when you need to go in, but sooner rather than later.
Yeah, what? Stuart, just a question there on these mobile calf shelters you were showing. Are mobile calf shelters allowed in fields, and maybe when the calf would be 5 weeks plus? Is there an issue with that, with nitrates, or does it matter?
Yeah, I suppose the best, like the calf shelters have been common enough, like Moore Park have used them for rearing calves, many farmers have used them for rearing calves. They don't spend a huge amount of time in them. I suppose when they're out and about, they're used to being, they're out grazing at that stage, Alan, and then they're getting fed the milk maybe as well, maybe once a day, maybe at that stage. So they don't tend to be as big an issue because they're not straw bedding out there as such. They're just a shelter, effectively. But you probably would be looking at, those that I showed there tend to be used in yards. But like the shelters that Moore Park would use would have maybe pallets at their base or timber at their base so that they're not lying on the ground. But there's no bedding material associated with them, and they may move them around as well, obviously, then just to avoid mucking up in the areas where they might be if weather was a bit iffy. I suppose the big thing to point out there, though, Alan, don't like the situation I showed there is different to what has been asked there. Right. If we get a beast from the east in early March and you have those shelters out in fields, you have to get cows back inside. So you do need capacity to handle what numbers are there inside as well.
Okay. Perfect. Alan, there, a question there about the sex semen again. The timing, is it very important with any, or is it any more important with sex semen rather than conventional? This farmer here said he's AI man only comes to his farm once a day at 10 a.m. So I suppose the question is if you see him at 6 o'clock the previous evening or if you see him at 8 o'clock in the morning, is there a difference between the sex and conventional?
Absolutely. So with your sex, that timing is really important. So I would say if your AI man's coming once in the day, I presume you're looking at is that 14 to 20 hours is the window after the first onset of heat. That's the key times where you're putting that sex semen in. So if your cow is within that window at the time of AI, it's suitable to use sex semen. And if she's not outside that, I'd be advising to be using conventional AI at that stage.
Okay. Emma, back to you again there. This is a question we often get. The inactive or active IBR vaccination, is there a preference between the two, or can you explain, as this person wants to explain the difference, why would you go for one versus the other?
Yeah, so I suppose the live one is the one that's more commonly used, just kind of good onset of action and just more widespread. What that tends to do is reduce clinical signs of new infections and kind of reduce transfer of infections from one animal to the next. Your inactivated vaccine then can sometimes be better at reducing shedding for chronically infected animals. Another thing maybe you could consider using your inactivated vaccination is if you do have animals that may go forward into AI centres or something like that. With your live vaccine, especially if you're giving it intranasally, there is a possibility that you can get kind of transfer from animal to animal, and that will render that animal antibody positive on a blood test then. So if that's kind of a possibility on farm, you could reach for inactivated. But in most scenarios, live vaccine going in every 6 months is a good kind of policy to adopt.
Okay, and just as a quick follow-up on that then, I suppose, could you get away with one IBR shot for a calf through the grazing season of the first winter, or are you looking at the second one?
So it depends when you're, if you are having issues, when they tend to arise. So you should get a 6 month duration of activity, and if you're going in with that at 3 months of age, then you should kind of have good immunity through the season. I would recommend going in then with your 6 monthly boosters, just to basically, reduce any chances of spread of infection and trying to control it.
Stuart, then I suppose it's only an opinion piece here now, but do you think farmers are going to be required to keep these calves longer in years ahead? Is there signs of that, or is it where we're going?
I'll throw that one back to you maybe, Alan, like, because it seems to be coming from your side of the house that farmers are just less and less inclined to take that younger calf.
Yeah.
And possibly understandable, like you'll always make the argument that a lot of the guys that you're dealing with, people that you're dealing with, are working off farm and they don't want the hassle of the young calf. And we've seen that they're just that bit vulnerable maybe in the younger days. So I think it just does appear that there's less and less of a demand for that 10, 12-day-old calf. And they can't go to export until they're 15 days. So by default, they just seem to be staying on farm longer.
Okay.
And I think definitely with the early bunch of calves, or a lot of people like to put a group of calves together, so they tend to be on farm longer than people actually think. People might be thinking they're selling calves at 14 days, but when they look back and see by the time the groups go, the averages are probably closer to the 3 weeks. I'd be hopeful that, I think just from a labour point of view and a facilities point of view, I think there's capacity to keep them for a small bit longer, but not significantly longer without significant investment.
Okay. Look, we're probably running out of time here, so we're finishing up, but we'll go to you, Alan, there. We have a double-ended question here for you, kind of. I suppose the first one is about the Aubrac. I suppose we looked at your presentation, we saw Charlie and Hereford and Limousin and everything mentioned. How does that fit in for a beef option? Are you seeing that getting a bit more popular? And the second one is then, I suppose, it's probably the one the beef farmers always ask, I suppose, can you actually produce, proper beef cattle from New Zealand Jersey type cows?
Yeah, so I'll take the first one.
Yeah.
The Aubrac certainly is getting more popular. We've two exceptional Aubracs, Thurlock Magnificent, and we've a new bull called Ballyclaw Theo. I would say if you're rearing your own calves, you're taking them to finish, farmers are really happy with them. They produce good carcasses at a good age, they have a good conformation, they do it all. I suppose the big challenge is if you're selling them at that 3 week of age, up to 5 weeks of age, they have that colouring, they have that markings, and farmers that are concerned that they're coming from Jersey crosses and they can be a problem selling in markets and things like that. But I would say if you have a buyer, you confirm with the buyer that they're from Aubracs and he's happy to use them, I'll work away with your Aubracs. Okay. And then another one is, and we often hear it, is this Jersey cross. Geez, you can't breed good beef off a Jersey cross. Well, I would say there's certainly, if you use high quality beef bulls on the Jersey cross, that is much better than some of them poor bulls being used on a Frisian cross. There's much more variation potential coming from that the beef bull side than there actually is between the variation between your Jersey cross and your Holstein Frisian cow. So I would say certainly is, but I suppose for farmers with those Jersey crosses, they probably have to make sure and put that bit extra effort into using that higher beef subindex beef bull.
And you need to go.
Alan, I've actually seen farms where crossbred herds where they've put the effort in, like Alan is talking about, and they have better average CBVs for their beef calves than some of the black and white herds. Because exactly as Alan has said, they're really concentrating on trying to deliver a quality calf because they have that challenge, whereas the black and white is a little bit maybe more laissez-faire around it and end up with poorer quality beef. But the issue is the JEX effectively.
Absolutely.
If people can see beyond that, then the numbers, the truth is in the numbers, isn't it?
What I was going to come in there was, for any beef farmers listening tonight, is just, I would say, remove that Jersey cross hung up you have. Is that CBV now, it combines that cow part and the bull part into one figure, and that's really what you should be looking at going forward. And that's the ones that have that higher genetic potential, irrespective of the breed of the cow it's come from.
Okay, no matter. Look, there's still questions coming in, but unfortunately we're running out of time here. So I suppose I would like to thank our excellent panel of speakers here tonight, Emma, Stuart and Alan. They've given a very clear and practical advice in terms of cow and calf management and on health, ensuring adequate facilities are in place on the farm for the calving season, an update on the calf movement regulations and the breeding of high quality replacement heifers, and also some dairy beef calves. As I mentioned at the start, this is the first in a series of webinars, and our final webinar will be on Thursday the 16th of January at 8 p.m, where our panel will focus on more the beef side of the house, so it's more beef style form for the calf to beef system. And we'll be discussing areas such as purchasing high quality dairy beef calves. We'll address winter finishing of dairy beef stock, and we hope you can join us on January 16th. I would like to thank our own Dairy Beef 500 team, Declan McCartan on production here, our programme sponsors, who without them we wouldn't have this programme, and finally to you, the audience, for questions and participation tonight. And I hope you've gained some valuable information tonight that you can apply at farm level. So I suppose in conclusion, please join us again here on January the 16th at 8 p.m. and thank you all and good night.